Welcome back to Running on Carbs Podcast. I am your host, Coach Val, and I am here to welcome you to episode number 9 of the podcast. So, moving right along, so happy that you are back with me today. And I wanted to share a topic that has been top of mind that I see a lot of questions about. So today we're going to be talking about race and run fueling. So whether you're racing or whether you're going out the door for your morning run or an afternoon training run, we're going to talk about all things fueling from a plant-based perspective. But before we get started, I do want to remind you that the May drawing is underway. So if you have a podcast review to leave for me, I would be so appreciative. You have an opportunity to write a review of the podcast. I hope it's a 5-star review. But if you write a 5-star review, and then share a screenshot of that on Instagram by tagging running.on.carbs so I can see it, then you will be entered into the drawing to win an 8-week training plan that I will custom write for you with your input. So please, I would really appreciate that. That's how this podcast grows. That's how it gets out to other people, is through your listening and subscribing, and then sharing it with others who might have an interest in the topics that I talk about here. So please do that, and I will enter you to win for that training plan. Also want to remind you that the Bashful Badass Virtual Run Club beta group waitlist is still open. Looking for only 6 ladies to join me in that group during this beta test. And I'm looking for someone who is very eager to help to grow that group. And ideally, you're between training plans because it is really focused on zone 2 running, conversational pace, so that we could chat during our virtual live runs. And then we'll also have a second meeting or Zoom during the week to talk about all your questions. So any plant-based questions that you have, any training questions that you have, and to really connect in that group that way. So there's 2 live calls a week that I have planned. One's a run, one's a meeting. And anyway, only looking for 6 ladies to join that first group. And then you will lock in your price for as long as you'd like to stay in that group by being a beta member, which would be a founding member. All right, so all the business is done. Let's get into our topic for today. So we are going to talk about pre-run fueling. So pre-run fueling means, getting the pre-run meal right from the get-go. And that could be, like I said, either going out in the morning for your run or in the afternoon. You're going to have different fueling plans depending on when your run is. And you're also going to have a different fueling plan for whether it's a race. And I'll get into that a little bit more. So getting the pre-run fueling right is really more of an art than a science, although both are involved. So there is a scientific, numbers as to how many carbs are, necessary, and, what are the levels that are in your blood system at any time. That goes into the very heavy science part of it. And there is definitely science involved, of course. I am not a scientist. I've said that before. I'm a recreational runner and a running coach. I am not a scientist. That is not my background. So I will leave that to the scientists. But we're going to talk about everyday boots on the ground. What do you need to know to fuel your runs? Because you don't need to know all the science to know what you need. So the key to great fueling, though, is practice. That much you can do. Practice makes perfect when it comes to fueling. And having a game plan out the door is going to help you. So as a plant-based runner, you can likely tolerate higher amounts of fiber than, say, your non-plant-based competitors prior to a run. because you're eating a lot of fiber with your natural diet. Whereas those who are not following a plant-based diet are likely not getting the high amounts of fiber from fruits and vegetables and all of the plant-based foods that they're not eating or consuming because they have replaced that with non-fibrous foods such as meats and dairies and things like that. So you have an advantage in that case when it comes to fueling because you can take in more fiber, so you can take in a little less volume of food because you've got the fiber to fill you up. So really, I tend to pay less attention to fiber when it comes to fueling because I know that you're going to get that, and I know I'm getting that in my plant-based diet. And, I simply see fiber as a benefit to feel full longer, on less food. So your stomach isn't quite as full when you're preparing for your run because you've got the fiber, so you didn't have to put as much volume into your stomach to make you feel full. And I love this, but what may send, another runner just running for the portaloo as far as fiber is concerned, you're going to be just comfortable and, full and satiated and off you go. So um, it's definitely a benefit in your favor. And since carbs come from plants, you are a plant-based runner, fueling your runs and even carb loading for longer distances really isn't going to be all that different. And it's not going to be as difficult, maybe, or as different from your daily diet than maybe somebody who is not plant-based. One difference may be that during a marathon fueling, you're going to need to consume more simple carbohydrates as opposed to your normal, healthier, complex carbohydrates. So simple carbohydrates would be things like a plain bagel versus whole wheat bread, or white potatoes versus sweet potatoes. So if you are used to eating more complex carbs, and when you're fueling for something long like a marathon, you really need those simpler to break down carbohydrates. That might be a bit different for you. Non-plant-based individuals, they're going to follow a similar eating plan or program when it comes to carb loading, but they might also add in dairy to their carb load because of those sugars. You can also add in plant-based dairies. So, for example, non-dairy yogurt, you could do that. I like personally, if you want one of my preferences, I love the Silk Greek style vanilla yogurt. That one's really good. I love the texture of that one. It's not quite as runny as some of the plant-based yogurts that are coconut based. So if you haven't seen that one, I highly recommend if you like that Greek yogurt thickness. It's hard to find with other yogurts. It's the only one I found that I really like. I tried a different brand, not so thrilled, but I like the Silk. So I don't get anything from Silk, just my little plug. You could also do maybe a non-dairy cream cheese as well, like a cream cheese spread, and then plant milks also. Meal timing, as far as when do you eat versus your run, that's going to really be a lot of trial and error. So always keep a journal whenever you are training for something. Keep a paper journal. I don't know. I prefer a paper journal because it's easier to flip back in and to find patterns. But whatever works for you, but keep a journal and keep track of what you're eating before your runs and your timing from when you eat to when you actually do your run. And, keep track of that during training so you have an idea of how you felt on the run. Was that too much food? I discovered when I was doing this that I don't do smoothies. So smoothies are just kind of a pain to me anyway, so I'm not a real big smoothie fan. They're noisy, they wake everybody up in the house, and you got to clean the container. It's just a mess. And then you got to drag all the stuff out. I just don't like smoothies. And then I found out that when I was trying the smoothies, because I thought it would be beneficial, so I did, woke everybody up in the house to try it. They It makes my stomach, like, feel like it's jostling around, so no smoothies before a run for me, but they might work for you. So maybe there's a trick to timing for you or the amount, and maybe it works for you. So try it. If you're a big smoothie fan, try a smoothie, see how it works for you, write it down, keep track of it, test it, trial it, and write it down so that you can document it for when you do your race, you'll know what works. Test everything out during training. The old adage rings true, nothing new on race day. So you want to make sure that you're trying all of this during your normal everyday runs and your normal training runs before you actually get to your race day. So you will know on race day what works and not do what didn't work. And you're not going to try something out all of a sudden on your race day when you really want to perform at your highest level. The macro ratios to energy expenditure is important. So the rule of thumb is that if you want to pre-fuel for any effort taking longer than an hour. So if your race or your run is going to be an hour or longer, then you definitely want to take in nutrients and fuel before you head out the door. The time of the day really matters. So if you're going to do a run in the morning, you have gone all night long in a fasted state since your meal the night before, and now you're waking up to go and spend a lot of energy running. So you need to make sure you're taking in some fuel. I know there's some controversy about fasted running and fasted cardio. I'm not a fan. I think, and especially if you're over 40, if you are a woman over 40, you have a higher risk of a number of things, and you need the nutrients in your body to protect your systems. So you need fuel, and running fasted is a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. And I'm sure there's lots of science to back that up. If I could find you the quotes, I would. But running fasted is not a way to just, get the weight off. What that does is it makes your body work really hard to get you through that run. And so now you're putting extra stress on all your energy systems and your bodily systems, like your muscles and tendons, etc. You're pulling everything out of your muscles, out of your bones, in order to fuel you and keep you going, because you didn't get any fuel for this, high energy output since the night before. So you're running on reserves. I don't think running on reserves first thing in the morning is a healthy plan. So make sure that you're fueling, and especially if, like I said, you're going to go out for a longer run, absolutely fuel. So even if it's not going to be an hour, so if you're running in the morning, take in something, even if it's a small amount, that's okay. Just take in some fuel. Keys to any pre-run meal would be, like the makeup would be a high carb, moderate protein, low fat and fiber. So that's sort of the balance that you're looking for. I don't think you have to stick to hard and fast numbers here. We're talking about ratios. So again, it's easy on a plant-based diet to get these kind of ratios because it's naturally part of your diet. So it's just naturally part of the nutrient pattern that a lot of the foods follow that you're eating. A lot of plant-based foods are going to be high in carb. They're going to be kind of okay in protein, moderate. And, a lot of these foods like fruits and vegetables, they're going to be low in fat. And the fiber content will be reasonable, I think. It depends on what it is that you're choosing. But it'll be probably low enough for you because your body, again, is used to that higher fiber intake. So what are some favorite meals and why are they working for runners? The key to these meals is the glycemic index. So it's the glycemic index scale, and also called GI scale for short. So the GI scale measures the effect of different foods on the blood sugar, glucose levels in the blood. It ranks foods from 1 to 100 with a low, medium, and high valuation for each of these foods. And it's only looking at carbohydrate. So It is looking at what it's looking at is how fast does it burn in the body? How fast does it break down? Not burn, break down in the body into the bloodstream. So low glycemic index foods are going to break down more slowly into the bloodstream, whereas the high GI scale foods are going to break down faster, and they're going to cause the blood sugar levels to rise either slowly or quickly, depending on that food and depending on which level it's at on that scale. And if you are diabetic, these are things that you're going to want to consider with your medical professional as far as the GI index, your foods and such. Again, I'm not a medical professional, so you really need to know your body. But if you're not dealing with a metabolic disorder, then this can really help you power your runs and really balance your energy system. As a runner preparing for a run or a race, it's valuable to have a mixture of both types of foods, so anything from the low to the high, depending on which distance you're running, and of course, the amount of time that you have before you actually hit the start line and go, whether that be the metaphorical start line of the front door or an actual race line, race start line. The reason for fuel. So, why do we need to fuel before our runs? Why can't we just run on our energy reserves? Obviously, we're up and around and functioning. We're alive. So we must have, the resources that we need. Well, we do, but it's being stored in our muscles and our liver. So glucose and glycogen are the preferred energy sources during an endurance activity. The glycogen is a type of sugar that's stored in the muscles and the liver. So anything excess gets stored and it waits. And then when it needs that energy, then it can pull from it through the energy systems. As you use energy during longer activities, the body draws on the energy to fuel your workout, whatever that might be. But without the proper reserves, then the body has to use an alternative energy system. And that energy system uses more resources from the body, like oxygen. And if you're running, you're kind of using that oxygen for other things. So you don't want to use it to power your mitochondria. You want to use your oxygen to, get air through your lungs and fuel or oxygenate your blood. So and get that to the muscles and everything that are working. So you want to use the most efficient energy system for the activity that you're doing. And in this case, endurance running, glycogen and glucose are going to be the preferred fuel sources for what you're doing. The goal of a pre-run meal. So what's the goal of a pre-run meal? It is not to put it in the storage tank. The goal of the pre-run fuel is to top off your energy already. So it's going to top off your glycogen, it's going to top off your glucose and your glycogen if it's long enough. And you don't want to start from zero. So the goal here is not to start from zero, which would be going out in a fasted state. That would be starting from zero. You want to start off with a topped off level. And so that's why you're fueling before you go out and hit the road. There's two types of carbohydrates, the simple and the complex. We talked a tiny bit about that a minute ago, but the more complex the carb, the more energy it takes your body to break it down and to use it for energy. So that's why taking in simple carbs is preferred for pre-race fuel or pre-run fuel. And those are going to be things like your plain bagels. That's going to be a simple carb. We talked about that. And then, whole wheat bread versus, that would be your more complex. So that's going to take more effort for your body to break down. Not to say that there isn't a time and a place for both in pre run fueling. If you have a lot of time before your race, then you might want something with a little more staying power and takes a little bit longer to break down in your body and to get the sugars into your bloodstream. So you might want that whole wheat bagel rather than plain bagel if you have a lot of time before you're actually going to hit the road running. So, those are things to consider when you are deciding what it is that you're going to eat before you go out on your run. Here's some examples of some common favorite pre race meals. So, sometimes they're pre run meals, but I definitely think these are like what you hear all the time for people that are headed out to do a race. And people want to know, what do you eat before a race? So, bagel with peanut butter, that's got to be number one. I would love to see a ranking system on this because I think that would be number one, bagel and peanut butter. It's high on the GI scale for the bagel, and it's low on the GI scale with the peanut butter. So you have a little bit of, fast burning carbs, and you have a little bit of the slower burning carbs for satiation. Is that a word? So to be satiated longer so that it stays with you and gets you to that start line. Dates and nuts, that's another good one. And again, that's a mix of high and low or glycemic scale foods. Banana with nut butter, those are both low on the scale. But if you have a longer run planned, or if you're going out early in the morning, you might like to have a little bit slower burning fuel. And that's a very popular one. Another one is oatmeal with something like blueberries. Different fruits are high or low on the glycemic scale depending on which food it is. So I am going to put a link to a website for the glycemic index in the show notes, so you can take a look at all the different foods on the list, and you can see it broken down by high, medium, and low, and find your foods on that list and see if you have a good combination. And again, make sure you're tracking that when you're tracking your meals to see what works best for you, depending on when you eat and what type of run you're doing and when the run happens after, as far as timing is concerned, after you eat. Okay, so oatmeal with blueberries. Oatmeal is medium. So oatmeal is a medium glycemic scale food, and the blueberries are low. So I think that's a great meal for like a mid-distance run or maybe an early morning run when you have a little bit of time for the food to settle before you actually head out and start running, because it's going to stay with you. White potatoes with salt. Salt's not going to have any glycemic index on there, but the white potatoes are high, but they're also low in fat. So you're going to just use those for some immediate fuel. It's a really popular snack for ultra runners. Ultra runners have sort of popularized the idea of potatoes for races, but I haven't seen anybody try them in a run. I actually did see them at I think it was a half marathon, but I think there was a marathon going at the same time. And I saw they had potatoes. I had never tested it, so I did not take a potato. But I did see it at like a road race one time. So that's interesting. I wonder how many people actually took them. Okay, so race day versus training day, different meals. Race days often start really, really early. So, especially if you're doing a marathon, they tend to start marathons really early because they have to get the roads open. So, they're going to start a marathon, at like 6 in the morning, and that's when it starts. So, you've got to back up your whole schedule from 6 a.m. start. You got to Anyway, you could be up at 2 in the morning getting ready for this, depending on if you have to drive there and all of that. So you could be eating at a really oddball hour of the day. And there's some tips to that. You're going to need more fuel, probably. Well, I mean, number one, if you're doing a very long race, you're definitely going to need fuel. But if you're getting up early in the morning and you have your race, you have to get to it, you have to drive there or something, even if it's in town. If it's a big race, like I do the rock and roll marathon and half marathon here in San Diego, and that's a really big race, and it can take you, a good hour or so. I did a 5K in Orange County a couple of weeks ago, and it took probably a good 40, 45 minutes, once we reached the location, just to get through the line of cars to get into the parking lot. So, I mean, that's a long time, of just travel time, and you have to factor that into your meal timing before your race. So keep that in mind. It might take you a long time to get to your race, so you wanna back up your meals with all that time, planned out. Um, but definitely fueling before, because you need that for optimal performance. Even if it's a 5K, it's not a long distance, you still need to fuel, especially if it's going to be in the morning. You want that for your optimal performance during your race. Um, but try to eat a race appropriate meal a couple of hours before you're going to hit that start line, so that it has time to digest and settle, and you're not running, like I said, with the smoothie sloshing around in your stomach or something. So think about your distance, and think about how much time you have between your meal time and start time, and then how much fuel you're going to need during that race. So if it's a shorter distance, like a 5K, you can just run off your fuel reserves from your meal that morning, as opposed to a marathon that you're going to need to be topped off fully before you start, and then you're going to have to take on fuel during your race too. And half marathons similarly, to that. So keeping that in mind and calculating in, how much are you going to need at the start, and then are you going to be taking in more as you go. And we can talk about fueling during races in another episode, because that is a whole episode all in of itself. And I don't want to confuse it here. So right now we're only talking about pre-race, pre-run. Okay. So training runs, though, are different than races. Training runs, most of the time, are walk out the door, or, very short drive, no traffic, no problem. Go where you're going, park, get out, stretch, run. So, or warm up run, no stretch. No stretching before. Remember, dynamic warm up. um, so training runs, you're going to need less fuel, but you're still going to need some fuel depending on how long it takes to get out the door and get where you're going, but less typically. So, if you've been eating all day long, so let's say it's not a morning run. So let's say you don't exercise in the morning, or you don't run in the morning. You're going to run after work. In that case, you might not even need to eat anything, because you've been fueling, you've been adding food to the tank all day long. You've had breakfast, lunch, maybe you have a snack in the afternoon. After work, off you go to your run. You don't need to eat before that. You've got fuel, unless you're hungry. In that case, maybe you want to eat a small snack before you head out, maybe an hour before you get off work. You take in something light, with a high GI index, and then you can go off, to your run. If it's in the morning, of course, we go back to the old adage, make sure you have some fuel. Okay, so let's talk about distances, because I did promise that I'd talk about some specific, fueling for different distances. Let's start off with the 5K and the 10K. 5K and 10K are pretty similar. I mean, it's obviously 10K is double a 5K, but they're pretty similar in the amount of energy reserves needed. You're likely not going to be taking in any fuel during your run on either one of those distances. So you're going to really be relying on your reserves and whatever you put in the tank that morning or before the race. I always say morning for races, because they 99% of the time are in the morning. Occasionally get the random one, like I had that 5K a couple weeks ago in Orange County. It was 5:30 in the afternoon. And admittedly, that was probably a harder race. If I would have actually been racing that one, That would have been difficult to fuel for because it was just an odd time of the day to be running fast, at least for me. Maybe not for you, but for me, that was kind of odd. Anyway, I digress. Oh, so 10K and 5Ks. Keep it light. You, if you're racing this, so I'm going off of the assumption in all of these races that you are doing this for, your best time and that you are going to be running them your hardest that you run. This is all, of course, specific to you, but that you're going to be racing it, that you're not walking the 5K and talking to your friend and chatting and enjoying the scenery, that you're going to actually be running these races for a fast time. Okay, so with that in mind, keep it light or keep it high on the GI scale. Some good options for that would be something like bananas. I know they're low, but they are definitely fast fuel. So bananas, rice cakes are a good option. Toast, white toast in this case. I know. Those of you who are like, wait, I need my wheat bread. I'm just like you. But in this case, we're going to go for white bread, toast, 100% fruit spreads. Those are great. If you want something with a little more staying power to keep you satiated, I would skip the full fat peanut butter or nut butters and maybe try a PB Fit. If you've heard of that, it's a peanut butter powder that you mix with water and it's lower in fat. So that would be better in this particular case because it's not going to sit so heavy in your stomach. And it'll give you some of that staying power. The powder will give you power by giving you some protein to go along with your high GI index food. Maybe you put a little PB Fit mixed up with water and you put it on some rice cakes or put it on the banana. It'll give those foods a little more staying power, but still give you that fast fuel energy that you need. Other options would be applesauce. So those little applesauce packets are great. And pretzels. Pretzels are always a really good, easy option, fast fuel, quick burning, with a little bit of electrolyte, a little bit of salt in there too. So that could help you in your race also. I know with 5Ks, sometimes that salt or the electrolyte mix can get a little wacky. I've had some issues with that. Usually when I do 5Ks, I take in little salt tabs, the little melt away ones, and that helps me not get side stitches. So anyway, again, I digress. I can't help it, but 5Ks are hard. If you're running a hard 5K, they're hard. And they do a number on your body while you're running them. You can test out a gel pack before the race. I personally did not have luck with that. I have seen other people do it and do just fine. I tried eating my meal well before 5K, so a couple hours before, I was fine. And, had plenty of time to digest and all of that. And then I tried out taking a gel, maybe about 15 minutes before the start of my 5K. All I could do is taste that gel like for 2 miles. So it didn't work for me. But again, test it out because maybe it works for you, or maybe my timing was off. Maybe I should have taken it a little bit earlier. I don't think I should have taken it later. But test these things out. See what works for you. That's an option, is to try a gel closer to the race. It's a tricky distance. So, 5Ks are tricky in and of themselves, especially for fueling. So, okay, so on to the half marathon. Half marathon is one of the most popular distances. So we really got to talk about the half marathon. Depending on your pace, you might need to take in more fuel pre-run, along with some in-run fuel as well. So you might need to take, like mid-race fuel, gel packs and whatnot. So it really kind of depends on your pace. I mean, if you're one of those really super speed demons out there doing these in, an hour and a half or something, you are going to need a lot less fuel than, say, the runner who's out there for 3 hours. So keep that in mind. What is your pace and how fast are you running the race? Also, you're keeping in mind, like we talked about before, how long before your wake up time and your race time. So that's going to help you decide how big a meal and what GI index foods you're going to put in that meal. So keep it light again. So we're not going with heavy meals during any race day. Um, Keeping it light with a mix of maybe some medium and low GI index foods. Some good options here are your little higher fiber fruits and vegetables. Personally, my favorite meal for any long run, including half marathon, is I like steamed beets with balsamic vinegar, a high quality flavored balsamic vinegar on some steamed red beets. And I have a particular reason for that. I like the nitrates in the beets, and I prefer to eat my food rather than drink a beet supplement. Personal preference. But they don't bother me. Some people I have heard when I mention it to them, they say, "Oh my gosh, I could never eat that, because of all the fiber, I'd have, bathroom issues." Those aren't usually plant-based individuals though. I think that most plant-based individuals aren't going to have an issue with that fiber, and I'm very used to it. So this is something that my body likes, and I've tested it over time, and I can do it and it makes me feel good. So for me, this is ideal. Test it out, see what works for you. But if you like beets, this is a great way to get them in. Um, they're both low glycemic foods, so they're going to be slower burning and longer lasting. The natural nut butters or nuts, those are other good options. Whole grains are a good option here, um, such as oatmeal. Personally, I prefer oat bran. I've done some research and study on it, and it turned out that oat bran was better for lowering cholesterol than oatmeal. So I switched over to oat bran instead. And this is a good time to incorporate dates. And I'll talk a little bit about dates later. I have 3 foods I'm going to share with you toward the end of this episode that are like, the top of the list foods. And I'm going to give a little comparison. But be cautious though of avocado. So some people really love their avocado toast. And although on paper that looks like it might be a good meal here, you might be careful with avocado. Um, Again, I tried it and I think the fat in the avocado was too much. I haven't done the whole breakdown, but it sat like a rock in my stomach. So didn't work for me. Maybe it works for you. Personally, I mean, I would be surprised if nut butters and avocado didn't have similar amounts of fat. However, nut butters work better for me, whereas avocado, like I said, sat like a rock in my stomach and made me feel really icky um, the whole time. So it didn't do well for me, but you try it, see what works for you. Um, Test it out. If you know you do great on avocado, then avocado's your thing. If you can't stand nut butters and you'd rather have avocado because you want that same nutrient makeup and it works, that's perfect. So try it out, test it out for you. Okay, on to the marathon. Marathon, whole other animal. Again, we could probably do an entire episode on that, but I'm going to give you some top level stuff. So early marathon starts leave you eating at very strange hours. So try maybe spreading your food out over a period of time before your race. So you can wake up in the morning as you're getting ready, you're starting to eat a little bit as you're getting ready. And then when you leave the house, you could maybe in the car eat a little bit more. And then at the start line, you can just top it off with something light, like maybe a gel or something like that before you actually start your race. Like while you're in the corral, warming up and waiting, that's usually, I mean, depending on the size of your race, you could be standing there for a half an hour, but somewhere between 15 minutes and 30 minutes, you could be standing in the corral for sure. So maybe top that off with the gel just before you start. And so over that period of time, you're going to have enough fuel to get you to your first actual fueling within the race. Or eat a larger meal, couple of hours before you actually hit the start line. So if you don't have a really big race, it's going to take you a long time to get to. Maybe you have a little bit later starting time, and you're not getting up at 3 in the morning. Then you could maybe afford to just do your meal a couple hours before, just like you would for a half marathon or any other. But you need fuel for a marathon. Please do not go out and just run a marathon with no fuel. You will almost certainly find yourself injured, sick, in the medical tent. And that just sounds miserable. I'm all about running being fun. I don't think we should do it to harm our bodies. I think we should do it because it's enjoyable, it's a challenge, but why make a marathon more of a challenge than it already is? So please fuel. Some good options for fueling would include foods from each of the GI scale index, or GI index scale. It can include more foods in the medium and low part of the scale because you're going to need that satiating power over a longer period of time. And it's going to keep you satiated. There's nothing like being on a long run or in a marathon and feeling hungry. That's just a terrible feeling. Try eating something light and high GI, maybe within that 15-30 minutes, like we were talking about. You do the gel, like we said, or maybe a rice cake. You could put a couple of chopped up dates in a little bag and keep them on you, and maybe eat those couple date pieces. Chop them up small because, especially if you're going to end up eating them on your run, chewing, breathing, running can be hard. So you chop them up small. But again, we're not doing anything new. So any of this stuff I'm talking about right now, you have tried it during your training and you know that you can do it. So this is all just ideas for you to do in training before you actually get to your race. Consider carb loading, definitely for a marathon. But again, make sure you're testing it out during training, during your long runs, during your training. Even if you're doing maybe less than a 20 miler, maybe you're doing a 18 miler or something, you can start a shorter carb load for that time period and see how your body does taking in a little bit extra of these simple carbs, especially if you're not accustomed to taking in simple carbs. They can affect your body differently. So, test it out over time. And carb loading doesn't mean just overeating. It doesn't mean that you just, oh, good, I'm carb loading, I can eat everything. Be careful with that because that can really get away from you. You may need to eat less fibrous foods so you don't get full as fast if you are carb loading. And you might also want to spread out your meals because you can get hungry sooner. So if you're trying to carb load, let's say 3 days before your marathon, and you're taking in these extra simple carbs, they're burning faster. That's the point, right? They're high GI index. So they're going to be burning through your body a lot. Your body's going to be using this fuel a lot faster than it would those complex carbohydrates that take longer to break down. So not only is it, putting that glucose into your bloodstream faster, it's also like breaking down, your body can break that down a lot faster because you don't have all the fiber. So it might leave you feeling hungry even though you've just eaten. Um, the downside of this can also be bloating and gas because your body is not breaking down all that fiber, so it doesn't have something to work on. I don't know all the bodily systems, but I do know that sometimes these simple carbohydrates, when you're not used to them, can have a counteractive effect on your body and cause some rather uncomfortable discomfort in your body. So, taking in more water, by the way, helps a lot with that. So, if you are finding that when you are carb loading, take in more hydration, more water, and that should help with some of that discomfort too. But try spreading it out, try spreading out these simple carb meals over different meal times. So instead of having just 3 meals a day, maybe try having 6 meals a day that are smaller. So you have the equivalent of the same amount of food, but you're just taking them in, a little bit throughout the day. That might help you. And along with the extra water, that might help some of this GI distress you could experience. Um, you'll use fuel during the run for this distance. So, for example, in the marathon, you're going to be using what's already in your muscles. So, the glycogen stores in your muscles are going to be used during this effort. You're going to want to top that off, and then you're also going to want to add more in as you go through the race. So, you always want to keep that level up during the marathon. Or you're going to do what they call hit the wall. That's what it is. It's when the glycogen stores are gone and there's nothing new coming in and the body can't sustain it. That's a wall. So that's what we all want to avoid. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're taking in our fuel. We are avoiding the wall. If you do tend to get hungry on those long runs, I know on some of the long runs that I was doing for training, I would get hungry while I was out there. The gel packs just weren't doing it. I wanted something solid. So, what I tested out, which worked for me, maybe it'll work for you, is I got those frozen Vans waffles. And I looked them up and discovered that the one that had the highest amount of carbs was the gluten-free brand or one. So I use the gluten-free frozen Vans brand waffle, VANS. And I just toasted those up, chopped them up into little pieces, and then stuck them in a plastic bag and brought them with me. And then every once in a while, I would just snack on a couple of those little pieces, and it was enough to help tide me over. It really helped my long runs. I brought them with me during my marathon, but during the marathon, I was fine. So I wasn't hungry. I didn't end up needing them during the marathon, but during the training runs, I needed it. And that might have been because I was more fueled. I had carb loaded before the marathon. And I used those waffles usually during my long runs that I hadn't carb load for. So that might have been the difference for me. All right, so I wanted to give you an example of my pre-run meal. And this is just as an example. This is what works for me, and this is what I do. But I thought you might be interested in seeing an example. And then you can do, of course, whatever works for you. But if you like these foods, you might try them. So my pre-race meal, so for any race distance, this is what I eat because usually the timing works out well for me. So it's enough food, but it's not too much. And by the time I get to where I'm going, I'm always getting ready early because I'm afraid to be late to a race. So I'm always the one who gets there really early. So I need a full meal before I run even a 5K because I know I'm going to be fueling 3 or 4 hours before the race. So my pre-race meal is an Ezekiel sprouted grain English muffin. It's in the orange package. It's the one I always buy. It's got 160 calories. They have 30 grams of carbs, 8 protein, 1 fat, and 6 grams of fiber. And I add to that 2 tablespoons of Kirkland almond butter, which is just almonds. I don't even think it has salt in it. And that's 210 calories, 7 carbs, 6 grams of protein. This one's got higher fat. It's got, because it's a nut butter, so it's got 17 grams of fat and it's got 2 grams of fiber. Then I add to that, because I always do, my 5 ounces of red steamed beets. Always have my beets. And they're only 62 calories for 5 ounces. They have 14 carbs, 2 protein, no fat, and just under 3 grams of fiber. So my total for my meal, that's my meal, and then I add a cup of coffee, but that's my meal, is 432 calories. There's 51 grams of carbs, 16 grams of protein, and then 18 grams of fat in that meal. Also, there's 11 grams of fiber in that meal, and to top it all off, there's 6 milligrams of iron. Now, I only add in iron as a comment here, as sort of a footnote, because there's something about, there's something about women, and iron levels are obviously very important. But as a female runner, I've read and I know that there's studies out there about footfalls, and with the feet hitting the ground and the blood and circulation, and what happens to the iron in the blood because of the impact of the foot hitting the ground over and over again, that it can have an impact on iron levels. There's obviously scientific studies about this that I don't have quoted here currently, but it's something that I just keep in the back of my mind. It's not something that I, study extensively, but I'm aware that iron levels are important for runners. And so I kind of just keep that as a footnote to note how much iron is here, because I want to avoid any type of iron supplementation. So anyway, just kind of a side note there about iron. So that's my pre-race meal, pretty much no matter what I'm running. I might add, for example, if there's a long time between my meal and the run, or if I'm doing a long distance, like a marathon or a half marathon, if there's a long distance or a long time between my meal and the race itself, I may add in a banana in between there if I'm hungry and if I'm concerned about being hungry during the race. But otherwise, that's plenty of food for me typically before my race. So a couple of the foods that I wanted to mention real quick, because I talk about them a lot and you hear about them a lot. Bananas, steamed red beets, and dates. So I did the calculations for 100 grams of each of those foods to compare the nutrient breakup of them. I, as you can tell, prefer steamed beets. That's my favorite pre-race, pre-run snack. So even during the week, if I'm just doing a really short run, I do them in the morning so I'm hungry and I don't run fasted. So I'll eat 5 ounces of steamed beets with a little bit of balsamic vinegar, and that'll be my pre-run snack before I go out. Even if it's only a 3-mile run, I will eat beets so that I have something in my stomach and some sort of fuel. And I prefer beets over bananas, but when you look at the actual nutrient makeup between beets and bananas, they're very similar. So a banana and 100 grams of everything, so they're even. So 100 grams of bananas is 89 calories. Beets are 44. Protein, they're almost the same. Carbohydrates are different though. So bananas definitely win in the carbohydrate category. They have almost 23 grams of carbohydrates, whereas beets only have about just under 10 grams. So double in bananas for carbohydrates. Fat is about the same. Fiber is about the same. They both have just under 3 grams of fiber. But one of the differences is that beets, red beets specifically, but beets have nitrates. And nitrates are shown to be beneficial in the blood, especially when it comes to carrying oxygen through the blood. And as a runner, carrying oxygen through the blood to the muscles and the systems and the respiratory system is really important. So again, like I said earlier, I would rather eat my nutrients rather than take them in a supplement form wherever I can. And so this is one of those areas that I find beets really valuable, is that I can get in those nitrates to help the blood flow through my pre-run snack. So that's what inches out over bananas. Now you can argue the carbs also for the bananas, like, oh, but it's higher carbs. So I think either one is a great snack, and if I don't have beets prepared, I eat a banana. So for me, both are great foods, but you try them out, whichever one works better for you. I think they're both great pre-run fuels. And the third food and last food that I wanted to share with you are dates, because dates are really popular as a pre-run and during run fuel. And there's good reason for it. So dates are fantastic. However, you have to be careful with dates, especially if you're concerned about weight, because dates for 100 grams, there's 277 calories in 100 grams of dates. That's not quite 2 dates. That's it. So that's a lot. So it's I think each date is somewhere around 60 grams, I want to say. So anyway, they're dense little buggers, and they're tasty. They're wonderful. I love them. I put nut butter on dates, and I could eat a million of them, but I can't eat a million of them. So at least I don't let myself do that. Protein, they have about the same amount of protein as the other two, about just under 2 grams of protein. Carbohydrates, wow, 75 grams of carbohydrates in 100 grams of dates. That's fantastic if you are looking for some fuel. um, Fat, hardly anything. Fiber, there's 6.7 grams. So that's like double what the amount of fiber is in a banana or beets. Um, and then iron, there's a little under 1 milligram of iron in there. But there's 64 milligrams of calcium. They're just fantastic foods, but you only want to take them in small amounts. So go easy on the dates, but dates are a fantastic option if you are looking for some fast fuel and some long burning fuel too, because of the amount of fiber along with the high level of carbohydrates. So, and then there's a lot of calories in there. So you're going to be taking in a lot of calories in a small amount of food. So you're not going to feel full, but you're going to have that caloric energy in your body for it to use. So dates are a fantastic option. All right. So how to put it all together, how to find, what do you need for you? Where do you start? There's a lot of great online calculators that can help you figure out as far as like carb loading. So carb loading is usually where I get the most questions. And like I said, there's lots of good calculators that can help you with that. But be careful, because the calculations are estimates and you have to know what works with your body. So I followed calculation estimates from a calculator the first time I did it. Thankfully, I practiced on my 20-mile long run. I had 2 20-mile long runs before my marathon. And so I got to test this out twice before I put it to work on my actual marathon. And I'm glad I did that, because it helped me a lot. Because the first time I fueled with the 20-mile run, I followed the plan exactly from what it was in the calculator. And I had a lot of GI distress beforehand, thankfully not on my 20-mile long run, but leading up to it, a lot of gas, a lot of bloating, a lot of discomfort, pain. And I didn't have enough water. So I didn't know about the water yet. So remember that they're just estimates. Follow your body. If you're getting full and bloated, back off the carbs, simplify it. Maybe don't add as many simple carbs to your diet. Don't make drastic changes. If you are used to eating complex carbs all the time, like I was, swap out some foods for the simple carbs, but not everything. So you want to have a good balance. You want to increase your simple carbs, but you don't want to shock your body because that's going to lead to a lot of distress. Um, anyway, it does help, but I could have used less of it myself in that circumstance. So anyway, remember they're just estimates. You're going to have to tweak it for your body and yourself. Please take a look in the show notes for the glycemic index guide. I put the link to the website there, and it's great information. And you're going to get lost in like looking up all the foods. And it's got good info. Everything's there. Use that to kind of build out some test meals and try them out on your next run and let me know. Jump over to Instagram or Facebook and let me know how it's going for you, what you're testing. I would love to hear it. And if you have any questions, drop them in there. Let me know, and let's chat. Okay, so that is our episode for today. I really appreciate you being here for episode number 9, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode. I am Coach Val. This is Running on Carbs Podcast. Go and run your best life on carbs. See you next time.